So welcome to another in our series on research skills workshops. We're very fortunate Jason, who just recently won the faculty award for teaching excellence. That was called? Yes. Was willing to speak to us today, even though he's still basking in his glory. Next Friday, I just wanted to highlight that Hannes Acker is going to be talking about crowdsourcing data collection, using different various ways of collecting data. Doesn't mean that you have to actually be there. And then we still have more people lined up for November. We're planning to finish near the end of November on this particular series. Okay? So without further ado, Jason.
All right. So we're going to talk about how to give an excellent presentation. This is not the best presentation. This is just a tribute. But I think it's important. There are common elements, I think. So who am I to be giving this at all? And I think I've given a lot of them. But also, I study, well, I'm interested also in how people present information, but I study how people remember and learn about information as well. So I suppose I'm somewhat appropriate to this topic. But I think one of the most important things that you need to consider before or when considering how to present information is a punchline. And I think your job as a presenter is to reduce the cognitive effort required to track your talk. Okay, so I think if there is any one takeaway message from today, this is it. So reduce the amount of cognitive effort, of cognitive strain, of how much effort is required to track what it is that you're going to be presenting about. That's really it. I mean, there's nothing more to that. But I'll unpack that throughout the talk, and I think you'll see what I mean. Some of this work comes from Kahneman's latest book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And Danny Kahneman talks about this idea of cognitive ease, okay? So, which is essentially what I'm promoting here. And he talks about different aspects of cognitive ease, which is repeated experience, clear display, primed idea, and a good mood. All of these four things kind of contribute to this idea of cognitive ease. Okay, so what do we mean by cognitive ease? It's essentially how easy stuff goes down, right? How fluent this information is, and all of these give rise to this cognitive ease gives rise to a feeling of familiarity, a feeling of truth, a feeling of goodness, and the fact that the information feels effortless. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm promoting here, is that what you're trying to instill in your audience when you're presenting information is a feeling of familiarity, truth, warm feelings toward you. And this kind of goes back throughout psychology, ever since even further than this, but Larry Jacoby and colleagues talked about this idea of cognitive ease, of repetition, in giving the illusion of pastness, right? That makes one feel like they're remembering, even though they may not be remembering. And so Larry did in this experiment, if you're not familiar with it, is in becoming famous overnight, is presenting words, names like Sebastian Weisdorf in a list of words, and then 24 hours later, when presented with a list of new and old words, people remembered. They didn't remember Sebastian's name deliberately, but it seemed more familiar, and they misinterpreted that feeling of familiarity as pastness, as though he was famous. And they wrongly indicated that Sebastian Weisdorf was, in fact, a famous name as opposed to just one that was presented before. Right? So that's the idea that you can mistake this feeling of fluency, this cognitive ease, with familiarity. And even Fechner described the glow of warmth which people feel in the presence of something that's familiar. So what I'm promoting here is the idea of repetition, I think. And when giving a presentation, it's very important that the audience understands exactly what point you're making, and you make that abundantly clear and beat them over the head with your punchline. Okay? Also, this idea of the mere exposure effect is the fact that arbitrary words, names, characters, pictures, faces, and sounds tend to be judged more favorably after several exposures. Right? This has been demonstrated again and again. And it's not just the repetition of words, it's also, as Kahneman was saying, the clarity of the information as well. So given these two passages of text, people judge the one as being better, as being preferred to the one on the bottom, because you can see it more clearly, right? So it's not just the cognitive clarity, how recent it is in memory, but it's also the perceptual clarity of the information that people prefer over information that's less apparent. So bright, kind of high contrast colors, I think, is important. Also, he demonstrated that stocks with easily pronounceable trading symbols, like CAR and Lunmu, performed better in the stock exchange, at least initially, to stocks that are hard to pronounce, even though the pronounceability of the labels are completely irrelevant to the actual stock. So just the pronounceability, the ease with which these things go down, improve the performance. An easy versus a hard-to-read font is also important. People judge the easy-to-read font as being more familiar, regardless of what the content is. Rhyming aphorisms, like what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals, is judged to be more true than the equivalent statement, what sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks, just because it rhymes, just because it goes down more easily, people judge it to be more true. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing here, is building a case for fluency, essentially, in the information, which people judge to be more true, more familiar, better, and so on. Also, when giving a presentation, people judge the speaker to the content of the speech to be more true if you don't use or in the actual presentation, regardless of the content. Right? This is one of my favorites, by Danny Oppenheimer in 2006. He presented people with the following passage, right? And they judged the applicant, the quality of the applicant for graduate school. I want to go to graduate school so that I can learn to know literature well. I want to explore the shape and the meaning of the novel and its literary antecedents, and so on. Yeah. Then he took this passage, looked up a thesaurus. Hey.
Go ahead, I'll get a couple more.
I'll go ahead.
So people judge, then he took this first passage about going to graduate school, and then he got a thesaurus and looked up the most, some of the more difficult words that describe exactly the same thing. So I desire to go to graduate school so that I can learn to recognize literature satisfactorily. I want to investigate the character and the connotation of the narrative and its literary antecedents. Right? So it's exactly the same content, just described in a more constipated fashion. Right? So, and there's really no need for that, obviously. And I try to hammer my students. People judge this first passage as being authored by a more intelligent person than the latter passage. So, and there's all of the obvious controls. You probably have all sorts of confounds jumping to memory. But yeah, he controlled for each of these, and it seems as though the ease with which the information goes down is the culprit. And we did, this is part of Marion Constable's honors thesis a few years ago. We were looking at kind of a traditional slideware presentation with bullet points describing first the anatomy of the eye. So the eye is a receptor for light and contains several specialized structures and so on. And you simply describe that content. So we have an audio track that kind of describes what's going on there without repeating exactly what's on the slide. Or we have another condition that's entirely visual. No pun intended. So it describes the operation of the lens, the iris, the pupil, and so on, and how they actually work. And what people found was that the slide, obviously, that has the images tend to be a lot more interesting overall than the bullet point slides. That's only part of the story. So they found this to be more interesting than that. No surprise, they also found any image that you present to subjects, even though it's loosely related to what's being presented, also to be more interesting. Okay, so to unpack that even more a bit, these are the interest ratings on a scale from very good to very dull. And every few milliseconds, what we would do is collect people's ratings, and they could toggle a little switch. It's like a little worm in the political sphere that you see. And so over time, across subjects, you would see them make these ratings. And as you can see, it doesn't matter throughout the passage of these presentations whether you're presenting relevant information or irrelevant information. People rate them as being exactly the same. So this is a summary mean, which worked out perfectly at 3.1 on a rating from 1 to 5. But when you present the bullet point slides like this, interest dropped significantly. The ratings here were about 2.4 on average. So that's pretty compelling evidence that interest matters, I think. And images are a way of producing that level of interest. But it's also only half the story, because it depends on your audience, right? So it would suggest that if you're after, say, teacher ratings, levels of interest, then you just throw up any old picture, regardless of whether it's relevant to the content or not, right? But if you're after learning, the question is what the relationship is between interest and learning. Okay? So we actually measured people's performance. And people who were presented with congruent images, the ones that actually relate to the content, were about 48% correct on the content of the lecture, about the visual system, compared to 38% for the irrelevant images, so a significant difference between those two. So even though they're identical in terms of people's interest, they're not identical in how much the information they retain, right? Which is quite cool. So it depends. If you're just after capturing people's interest, great, that's easy, right? But if you actually want to ensure that they learn something, that they retain something from your talk, then that's a bit of a different story. Incidentally, for the bullet point passage, people were about 44% correct. So there was no significant difference between congruent and text-based condition. So even though they weren't terribly interested, they learned a fair bit about the content, right? So, but they weren't interested. So, I mean, it's difficult to strike that balance between interest and memorability of the content. But I hope I can help you with that. So the punchline from our experiments was that images will capture people's interest, whether they're relevant to the content or not, right? Also, interest does not necessarily translate into better learning, but most evaluations of teaching confound the two, right? We don't often have a very good measure of how much the people learned in the class. We're simply looking at customer satisfaction more generally. So even before starting your talk, I think it's important to ask yourself what you want out of it, okay? Even before you crack your laptop or even jot a note, think about what you want out of it. I mean, if you're going to a conference presentation, are you there to meet particular people? Are you there to share your research? You're trying to entice people to read your paper? What? I mean, these are all questions you need to ask. So when it comes to a conference presentation, these are just a few that I jotted. Are you trying to inspire them to read your paper? Are you just trying to promote your research program? Are you trying to get feedback? Are these just kind of preliminary data that you're just feeling early on before you actually write the paper? Right? Put the effort into writing the paper if nobody likes it, or if they have some fatal flaw in your methods or something. Now's the time to find out. Are you trying to impress the audience? Or foster collaboration? Right? That's important as well. For a job talk, that's a little bit different. Right? For a job talk, all of the things apply, but slightly differently. You're trying to impress your future colleagues, right? Which are a diverse group. So you're not simply appealing to the people within your tiny little field, right? You're appealing to everyone in the entire school. So from developmental psychologists to cognists to neuroscientists, everyone. And so they need to be able to track your stuff, right? So when it comes to a job talk, you need to be able to demonstrate enough breadth that they understand that you kind of know your way around and that you can appeal to a larger group, but also enough depth in the content that you know your research extremely well, and that's a very difficult balance to strike. You need to sell your research program, again in the same way, to show that you have the capability to not only demonstrate that you can do a few experiments well, but also that you have a broader picture of how your research is tracking, that you have future things kind of in the pipeline and so on. That you can showcase your expertise. Again, you know your way around. You're selling yourself. Part of the job talk, when it comes, I mean, they have your CV. If you've made it to the point where they're interviewing you, where you're actually giving a job talk, you've passed a lot of hurdles to get to that point. You've pretty much sold them that you're worthy, that you've done a lot of work and so on. You don't need to convince them that of your methodological rigor and so on in that particular talk. You're essentially selling yourself. They're there to see you, right? They're not there to see what you're capable of. I mean, they can read your papers. They want to see how you're performing more generally. So I think it's important to sell yourself. And obviously you want to get the job. And so think about how the presentations would differ between a conference presentation, where kind of you're getting feedback on papers, you're selling a particular idea, and so on, and a job talk, where you're kind of selling a package, the whole package, right? And they're two very different things. And both of those differ a great deal from the lecture. Right? For lectures, I mean, you're enhancing learning beyond the readings, presumably. Inspiring and motivating students, you're gaining insight into your own field, you're teaching them how to think, and building better citizens, for example. Those are your grand aspirations. They are for some, I suppose. But again, I mean, in thinking about how to design a lecture, that's where the difference between, say, learning and interest might play a big role. I mean, depending on what you're trying to get from your students. But the third one's actually important. That struck me, gaining insight into your own field. I don't think a lot of people appreciate that we often, as lecturers, kind of use students as a sounding board for our own ideas, right? To kind of present our own research and see how it goes down, see what they think, which is quite important. So again, depending on your audience, depending on the mode of what you're trying to do, your presentation is going to be very different. And so you can't just flip open the slideware software, right, and start plunking slides in without giving this some thought. And this is the very first thing you need to do. Who's your audience? What are you trying to get out of that presentation? And spend a lot of time on that, first of all. And again, regardless of those three types of presentations, your job is to reduce the cognitive effort required to track your talk. And again, I think you might want to say, I mean, I'm not advocating that you dumb it down for anybody. I mean, but you don't want to lose anybody in that room. Or maybe you do. I mean, if you're giving a talk and you have one person in the audience in mind that you're trying to target who knows a lot more than anyone else, fine, right? If that's your goal, great. But if you're trying to reach everybody in that room, then you need to really kind of backtrack a lot and assume nothing in terms of what you're presenting. So you're reducing the signal-to-noise ratio and getting out of the way of the audience in order so they can understand what you're talking about. So I'll talk about three things: structure, delivery, and tips, which I think are important. First is structure. Again, even before you crack open the slideware, before you get to this point, I would say recommend that you distill the content of your talk into one punchline. One thing that's going to fit on a sticky note. That's it, right? And what you're going to do, this is useful for a few purposes. One, by reducing it to a single punchline, to a single note, you're going to build the entire presentation around that thing, right? So it's going to serve a couple purposes. One, you'll beat them over the head with this one thing, right? So they're going to walk away with something, the main thing that you want them to come away with in your talk. So you'll make sure that that happens if you do this exercise. Secondly, the act of distilling, of reducing it to a single point, is going to be extremely useful because you'll filter out a lot of the crap, right? A lot of the kind of details, the methodological details and so on of your stuff, and you'll kind of home in on the one element, the kernel that you're going to build the entire talk around. So again, even before you do any of this, this is an important element. Obviously, if you're doing a job talk, or say a 45-minute lecture, or an hour and a half or something, then you break it down into smaller punchlines, right? Or a punchline and 3 themes, say. But it's a lot more manageable in this sort of respect because you have 3 manageable chunks, 3 15-minute segments, right, that you can kind of build on. And it's, again, thinking in terms of cognitive ease. If people have a structure, right, if people have these 3 chunks that you're trying to absorb, it's going to go down a lot easier, right? They know what to expect, they know what's coming, and it's going to be a lot more fluent than if you are just kind of darting all over the place trying to do too many things. So once you've created your punchlines, and you can take a step back, and again, I'd recommend just sticky notes, right? And kind of building around these ideas. That's your core. This is your punchline. And then just start putting stuff together around that particular core, right? So, okay, these data. And there's this one paper by so-and-so. Oh, that would be really good. And kind of building it around that, right? Now you can imagine when you open up your slideware package and you're shifting slides around. It's a huge waste of time. If you can do a lot of this stuff up front, you can then replace the stickies with other stickies and then move them around quite easily without investing any time and effort into actually generating the content, right? So I think that's important. And then, just use a word processor and just copy bits of text around and so on and kind of filling it out. But don't write a script. Please don't write a script. The worst thing that you can do is write out exactly what you're planning to say. Now, I'll get to this in a bit, but one of the things you'll need to do is kind of present, if you present it as a story as opposed to something that you recite, I think that's important. If you can imagine trying to convey Cinderella to somebody or the plot of your favorite movie, right? By doing that, you're not reciting Cinderella, right? You're simply telling them about it. And I think it's really important to try to tell people the story instead of recite the story, because your audience will be able to tell if your stuff is, memorized in an instant. And then it just seems effortful. You're kind of feeling for them, going, "Oh, this is awkward," right? Because they're straining and trying to remember lines and so on. And it's just a lot more natural, a lot more fluid, I think, if you're just kind of talking to the content instead of reciting it. So, the punchline, your job is to reduce the cognitive effort required to track your talk, and then you build around it. Again, for this talk, building these bits, right? Finding a good image, hey, that would be 3 elements of that, and this is what you're doing even before you crack your slideware, right? You're kind of building all of this kind of stuff around it, okay? And that's the first step. And then once you've done that and you're ready to prepare the content, be sure to avoid the illusion of the expert. What do I mean by that? The illusion of the expert is essentially the fact that you're often too close to the content to be able to appreciate what it's like to learn it for the first time, or what it's like to be out of the area, right? Now, I have a friend, for example, who's a postdoc, and what he was doing was presenting his job talk to myself and Melanie, and we were kind of going through it, and he was presenting for the first time, and it was really over the top. I don't think there's a single person on this planet who's closer to my own research than this guy. And I could barely track it. I was just hanging on, going, I don't know what you mean by that, right? And he would use jargon, for example, instantiated features and informational features, right? And they would look at me like blank, like that. And when he was presenting this, I was just looking at it going, what do you mean by that? And then, oh, right. And then he'd unpack it a little bit for you. But this was a job talk. So he's talking to people in the audience who aren't even in cognition, right? And he's using jargon-filled terms like that. And if you're doing that, that's fine if you have a room full of people who understand that. But he clearly misunderstood the depth of knowledge of Melanie and I in the room. And I should have been able to track this stuff. But what we ended up doing was, as he was giving his presentation, we would stop him at every point that he lost us, right? That he'd use a jargon-filled term, or he'd require that we retain something that he talked about 15 minutes ago, or something like that, right? And we just go, sorry. And then, what? What did I do? I don't get it. And then every 5 seconds or so, we'd be, and so on, as he'd give this talk. And that alone is extremely valuable. So one of the ways to avoid the illusion of the expert is to use non-experts, right? Run it by them, and make sure you hold them to being honest about whether they understand the content or not. That's gold. Getting that sort of feedback is virtually impossible. But if you can ask someone to do it, then you can. One way of doing it is to really explain it in more detail, but you're still going to miss it. It's an illusion. There's no way that you can put yourself into a position where someone doesn't understand it, that they're not immersed in this stuff. So I think that's pretty important. What makes the content stick? And we know this. You're in experimental psychology. This is our bread and butter, right? And this is what surprises me, that a lot of people don't think about what makes content stick, because this is what we do, right? We know what makes content stick, right? What captures attention? We know what captures attention, right? Things that are odd, things that are surprising, and so on, right? This is common stuff. Reducing cognitive load, right? If you're presenting information, on a slide in bullet points, and you're saying something at the same time that's different than the stuff on the slide, there's going to be conflict, right? So you see both of these things happening, and your audience cannot track it, no matter how much you want them to, no matter how desperate you are. You're assuming too much, and they can't do both of these things at once. So there are different ways of presenting information. I mean, you can present it fluently. You can present it, even complex topics, really complex topics, as long as you break it down until they understand the different elements. And you focus in on the important things, highlight the things that you want them to remember while fading the other things out. I mean, there are software ways of doing this as well. For example, I mean, this is a fairly complex set of data that you're going to refer to, and I could just refer to this one and this one, but you'll have people kind of focusing on here at the same time. But if you kind of fade those ones out and highlight this, right, then there's no ambiguity about what you're talking about, right? And this is not difficult to do. Then refer to this one. Let the software work for you. And it doesn't have to be flashy or glitzy. I mean, you can just simply use one slide to present the information that you're interested in. But there are different ways of doing that. And images are extremely important. And we'll get into why, but there are theories, dual coding theory, for example. Whether you buy it or not, I mean, I think it's a pretty good heuristic. A verbal system and a non-verbal system. I mean, these might not fall into reality in any sense, but the idea is that you have these two systems that are operating, but also share resources. And so the idea is that when I present information, visual images like this, you have no problem tracking what I'm saying, right? You can easily listen to me. I can ask you things. 5 plus 5 is what, right? There's no problem here, right? There's no conflict between the visual information that I'm presenting here and the auditory information that I'm presenting. Both of these things can happen simultaneously without any difficulty whatsoever, right? So that's the idea of dual coding theory, that you can do both things at once, right, without any problem. But when you present this information, and I'm trying to do the same thing, right, if I'm telling you something fairly complicated, then there's no way that you can do both, right? You either read the slides or you listen to what I'm saying, but you can't do them both at the same time. It's very common for people to do this and speak like this, right? And the reason is, I think, that they feel like just giving people a handout with their presentation doesn't really justify their existence at the conference or in that job talk or something like that. But if this is all you're presenting and you're just essentially reading it to them, then just give them the paper, right? So you have to ask, I mean, in terms of these cognitive load theories, again, as these things are going, what you're doing is presenting each of these two verbal and nonverbal systems with different amounts of information, depending on what's in the slide. Right? But the second that you present this lecture slide, the verbal system is full, you're presenting also verbal information auditorily, and you overload the system. Right? That's the idea, that you can present information visually at the same time without any conflict. We also know the picture superiority effect. People are much better at remembering images than they are words. Right? That's partly due to the fact that words are inherently overlappy. Right? Whereas images aren't necessarily. You can have two different forms of cup, for example, but one word describes both. So you have your punchline and you're building around that punchline. And that's the center. You have your core and you're building on and on around that. But you don't want to lose people with the structure. You also need to provide landmarks. Right? Tell them, well, this is where I was, right? This is where I am now, and this is where I'm going. Okay, so they understand. Again, that gives that sense of fluency, of structure to your talk, so you're not losing them, right? So, this is where I was, this is where I am, and tips is where I'm going next. But let's talk about delivery. Again, once you've created your post-its, you've kind of developed your talk around that, you put it all together, you have all of your content, you've built it around your punchline, like that, then it's time to actually give the thing. How do you do that? I mean, again, what I would say is don't read a script, right? It's very comforting to have exactly what you're going to say right in front of you on sheets of paper that you can just rely on in an emergency. But having that, right, is going to actually prevent you from talking about the content. You're going to be just reciting a script. So just don't do it. And if you refer to TED Talks, if you haven't seen or watched TED Talks before, do. I mean, they're absolutely extraordinary. So the idea behind a TED Talk is it's a conference, it costs about $7,000 per registration to attend. And the goal is to present a talk that's going to like change the world, right? It's going to be the best talk that you have ever given in your entire life. And it has to be, I think it's 18 minutes max, right? Or I think they have a 10-minute version, a 4-minute version as well. So these are short, extraordinary talks. And you can see how people actually present here. And they don't read, right? There's no reading, there's no scripts. And they're just amazing. Even though they have practiced this thing thousands of times, it just looks like they're having a conversation. It's extremely natural. And so if you go to the TED.com, you can see, and this is another suggestion, is that you watch some of these, and so you can see what extraordinary presentations look like. If you are selected to be a TED speaker, again, this rare sort of privilege, the next day you will get a stone tablet sent to you by FedEx. Or not. They will send a stone tablet with the TED commandments on it. So it has things like, thou shalt not simply trot out thy usual shtick. Thou shalt dream a great dream, or show forth a wondrous new thing, or share something thou hast never shared before. Thou shalt reveal thy curiosity and thy passion. Thou shalt tell a story. And again, it gets back to this idea of storytelling, which I think is important, because you can even tell. I mean, even when I did it, when I was reciting the story about my colleague, right, who was giving this job talk, all of a sudden people kind of relax, right? They listen, and you can absorb it, right? It feels like you're just translating information. You're not bombarding people with content. It's a lot more memorable, and I think a lot more fluent to be able to do it. So they actually require that in one of their commandments. In TED Med, which is a related TED event, they have similar stuff. For example, I'll speak from my heart, not from my notes. I'll speak in plain English so that all may understand. I'll present only one big idea. I'll use visuals to enhance my words, not duplicate them. I will share my true character on stage. I will showcase the thinking, not the thinker. I will will not sell or solicit the audience. I will rehearse for timing, clarity, and impact. I will hand over the stage when my time is up, and I will attempt to reveal something the world has never seen before. Which are all good, I think. But more practically, I think, make sure that the audience knows exactly what it feels like to be a participant in your experiment. This goes back to the idea of, why are you there? Right? What are you doing presenting to people if they can just read your notes? And so there are things you can do in this sort of environment when you're presenting to people that you can't do on paper. One of them is to present exactly what it's like to be a subject in your experiment. Right? And so you can see in this case, so I apologize, the resolution is pretty low. But the idea is that you can read as a subject in this experiment, you read a vignette, then you can analyze prints, then you select it in this way, and so on. If you show, most of the time when people present about what they did in an experiment, they simply watch, they're watching you present and desperately trying to figure out, what does it look like? Just tell me what it looks like to be a subject, and then they try to hypothesize kind of on that basis and so on. It's not out of the realm of possibility with software. There's, for example, Snaps Pro does it if you use, I think this is for Mac and PC. ScreenFlow, which is what we're using to podcast this at the moment. Or if you have a Mac, QuickTime does it. It has this thing called screen recording. You just go new screen recording and select do it, right? And then just drag and drop it into your presentation and show people what it looks like to be a subject instead of telling them, right? You can do it extremely fast. It would take a minute, not even, 30 seconds just to convey what they see. And I think the feedback that you would get if people can actually see it is going to be a lot more rich than if you're bothering trying to articulate, well, no, it was like this. It was 4 milliseconds between, and so on, right? Why do that if you can just show them? And pause, right? When you're presenting, if you make a point, let it sink in. There's this little button here on a remote, which corresponds to the B key on your keyboard. And if you just click it, it turns it black, right? So if you just click that button and it goes black, all of the focus is on you, right? So if you're just talking and you want to make a point, just turn off the screen for a second, and then everyone listens to what you have to say. Say it slowly, pause, let it sink in, and then move on. right? And it's extremely powerful, but a lot of people just kind of rush through it, I think. Step away from the podium. All of these rooms and so on have a podium, and it feels kind of safe to be behind them, but often, yeah, I mean, it feels artificial, and it kind of hides the presentation and so on. So if you can step away, then do. And again, if you can be replaced by a handout full of bullet points, then you should be. And I don't mean to make that glib or anything. I mean, that is an effective way. I mean, or they would kind of set you free. If you give people, if you just have a stack of them that you can distribute, right, then that frees you up. And then you can kind of talk with them. People aren't, you're not worried that they misinterpreted exactly what you said, right? And providing the p-values and so on your slide. You don't necessarily need to do that if they have the information in front of them. Right? Give them that, and then speak to the content. So again, what are you adding to the audience's experience? And I think really that's worth asking. A lot of people don't. Instead of just reading them the content, they just feel like you're reading the presentation. So some tips. Good places to find images. I say they're important. I'll post these slides. If you go to Getty Images, that's one of the best. You sign up for free. Then when you sign in, every time you go, you can download images. If you're signed out, you get this watermark on them. If you're signed in, you don't. And this is the size of the image that you get, which is pretty nice. And the nice thing about stock images is that they nicely depict the concept that you're trying to convey. Instead of just kind of a photo that you've taken, an amateur photographer, stock images do a much better job of conveying information. So there's a lot of places you can get stock photos around the web. And it's just a matter of finding them on there. Some are free, some cost. It's just a matter of digging around to find them. Other handy websites. One is Color Lovers. If you're a real designer, actually, go to Color Lovers. They have these palettes, these really nice palettes of colors. And again, some of these just really pop. But you can see the adjacent colors that go well together with it and so on. Another one is Color Brewer for a more pragmatic sort of means. They have these palettes, but they're also, it's not just the hue, the pretty hue that you're interested in, but it's functional because it actually manipulates the saturation and the brightness of the color as well. So it translates to grayscale nicely if you have to translate it to a paper. Also, they have a little color setting so you can see what it's like to be colorblind, so you're not eliminating any of your audience. GetTube. I think there's a Windows equivalent for this, but if you just download GetTube, then you go to this little utility here where you can just search whatever you like. Then you can just, like you're watching a YouTube video, it has this little download button in the bottom right-hand corner. If you click on that, you can nav the video, or you can just nav the audio, if you like, right from YouTube. And so the beauty of that is that you can present it actually in your presentation. If you download it, there it is. Right? In all its full glory, there's no mucking around with internet settings, making sure that it's actually being referred to and so on. It's all right there. Don't use PowerPoint or Keynote bullet point templates. These are lame. Right? The first thing, you fire them up, that's what it looks like. Just ignore it. Right? Go to the blank slide and create it on your own. Always use a clear, readable font. Those are some. When the Higgs boson was announced, people used Comic Sans to describe this event, and it akin it to like turning up to a black tie event in a clown costume. So if you think that font doesn't matter, I mean, yeah, it kind of does. Use a large font. I mean, when you're actually presenting, you can see at what point you can see in this room. It's about 24 points or less, right? But use larger. The larger the better. A dark background like this, so black background, avoid fancy textures. Again, you're just distracting the viewers. High contrast figures and graphs. Don't be afraid of empty space. You're not going to run out of digital ink. 1.1 slide, I would say. Again, there's no ambiguity about what you're talking about if this is on there. The audience should never have to think about where to look. Make sure that you resize images proportionally. Don't stretch them out. I think PowerPoint has finally come to its senses and by default turns on the constrained proportion setting. Don't use company templates. This is what kills me. I don't know why they do this, but with headers and footers and telling them where the conference is and who you are and logos and everything else. This gives you about this much space to write in, and it's completely unnecessary. They know who you are, right? They're there, right? So, and it's just really quite distracting. Alignment is critical. Make sure that things don't look like they're placed randomly. Use high quality graphics. Don't ever scale up an image. If it's too small, it's too small. So either find another image or go somewhere else. Avoid slide transitions and complicated builds unless they help make your point. Some can. I mean, if you're actually moving things in or spinning it around, if you're physically referring to something that's spinning or something, right, then it's helpful. But just avoid them as much as you can. No matter how cool it looks, avoid Prezi. Probably you may not have heard of what Prezi is. You will, I'm sure it's coming. This is this sort of presentation style. And what it is it zooms in and out. And so you develop your entire presentation. You can zoom into various elements and then out, and then to different elements. And this is what it looks like. And it's almost, it looks kind of cool for the first time you've seen it. It's kind of like Google Earth presentations. But it's a bit nausea-invoking, if anything. And it really detracts from what you will never even comprehend what they're saying if you're presenting in that way. And present to a variety of audiences and give honest feedback. If you use your own laptop, you'll know exactly what the presentation will look like. Be sure to give it a whirl ahead of time in the same room using the same projector. A remote is good, $66. This is about 10 years old now, but it works pretty well. Don't depend on your presenter's display, which I have there, which looks like that. You can see your slide, the next slide, and your notes, which you can refer to in an emergency. Just recently, last week, I actually went to Melbourne to present here at the MCG for a bunch of lawyers, defense lawyers, which looked like this. And you can see it was massive when I was here, right at the front of the room for my presentation. And it turns out that the VGA cord that connects to your laptop didn't work. And so they had to use a backup one where my laptop was over here. Right? So no notes, right? There was nothing. I had nothing. I had my remote. There I was, which was good because my laptop was across the room. And so, yeah, there was me, and I had to stick behind a podium in this case because the microphone, no one would have heard me in the room. And so you can also see in this room they have these little tiny televisions all over the place, and that's what people were watching you on. And so again, it's really useful to be familiar with the venue that you're going to present at for exactly that reason. And recency is your friend. If you stop on a high note, I mean, we know a lot about people's experiences, and the peak of the experience and the end of the experience are the two most important elements. So make the end bit the highlight of your talk, and that's what people are going to remember. And then come full circle, again, for that sense of fluency that you get. So your job is to reduce the cognitive effort required to track your talk and finish on time. So I'll do that. And that's it. That's all I'm going to have to... But if you have any questions, let me know. I woke up at night trying to think of, I kept thinking, oh yeah, don't forget about X. And so I probably haven't covered even nearly as much as I would have liked to. But.
I have a question about lectures. So I like your point about not having a lot of text on the slide because that's going to interfere with people listening. But students seem to like to have it all written down so they don't have to worry about taking notes.
Yep.
So would you recommend like posting a more detailed version of your PowerPoint and then showing them?
You could do it a couple ways. So what I do now is I record all of my lectures ahead of time. So they watch their lectures instead of me standing in front of the room. Right? So each week, they have a week to watch my lectures. It's an hour and a half recorded lecture. And then we show up in a class, and we actually work on the activities, on the content, assuming they show that they know the content already, which is how I get around that. But alternatively, before I did that, I think it's important you can prepare a handout, for example, with the information in a more digestible way than this that I just presented. Or not. I mean, if you podcast the lectures, if you present the actual recording of your lecture for them to watch after the fact even, then that kind of frees them up as well. So they know that they don't have to sit there busily recording every word that you prepared if they know that it's going to be available for them. Whatever you can do to kind of free them up and pay attention, I'd recommend. But yeah, I mean, 1 point per slide probably doesn't get that, so I'd say a handout's probably the best. Any questions?
So, as you know, I've been influenced by your style over the last couple of years, and I recently gave a conference presentation in which I was really minimal. I had the photos and the text, and one thing I just wanted to reiterate, because I think what happens, you get into these bad habits with all your bullet points and stuff, is that you do have to rehearse a lot more in order to do your talk appropriately. Because I think what a lot of lecturers have gotten into the habit is they can just read what's on the slide as like their notes.
Yeah.
Even if they can't be at their presentation laptop, they can still look at the slide and all the information's there to cue their memory about what they were going to talk about.
Absolutely.
But when you kind of go to this more minimalist style, you really have to rehearse. And so I found myself having to do like 3 times before I felt comfortable enough that I could actually go and stand in front of a group of people in my more minimal.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I've been doing it so long I can't remember how many times I've prepared before, but that's my general rule now. Having done it, and even a familiar talk that I've given several times, I give it 3 times before the actual presentation. I know the first time is just to gauge whether it's an hour or 15 minutes. Generally, you can have a pretty good idea. You're in the ballpark, but yeah, it gets you in the right. The second time, it's actually for content, and then the third time is just kind of refining it. And then if you have to do, if it's really important, give it more. For a job talk, give it 10,000 times. I can't emphasize that enough. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
With the whole fluency principle, if you beat people over the head with a point too much, can't it be annoying? Because it's the overexposure effect?
It can, absolutely. But I think, yeah, so just repetition enough, just to remind them. And mainly, I mean, in terms of the fluency, in terms of that structure reminder. So, I mean, here I was going overkill to make the point, but in this case, if you just have a structure that they can track, it goes down a lot more easily. I've heard both kind of talk. I mean, if it's, you don't need a structure if it's 10 minutes, say. Right? Here's what I'm going to talk about, say in Wen's 3-minute thesis. I'm going to tell you about these things, and it's going to be 3 minutes. That wouldn't even make sense, right? So you just do the one thing. But to the extent that it's longer than that, they need structure. They need things to actually hang on to, I think. Even a TED Talk, I mean, that's about 15 minutes. You might be able to get away, if you're simply making a single point, you can probably just make it instead of telling people about how you're going to make it. But beyond that, it's probably much.
I would sort of disagree with that a little bit in the sense that you would still need structure. Your talk would still have but the repetition bits, you mean?
Yeah.
And just because you don't say that same sentence over and over again doesn't mean you're not repeating the point in different ways.
Yeah. And particularly for lectures, I think we really kind of, I do it as well. I really kind of overestimate the amount that I think they're actually taking away at any minute. And then you say it again, and some people are going, oh, I get it, finally. I said it 15 times before.
I would just one to, I like the way you're hammering home never using a script. And I was thinking, oh crikey, I use a script quite a lot. And yeah, maybe that just means my talk to shit. The original, my original thing, that was sort of way back when I was sort of learning this craft, as it were, in the first place. And it was all about stage fright, where, well, no, it was about stage fright, but it was also about alcohol poisoning, where you go to a conference and you're talking to the first one after the massive free wine reception. So the idea is no matter how hungover you are, you've got this talk and it's in 25-point font, so you've got something, and if you rabbit in headlights, you've got something there, so you're not, you've got your safety network. But I mean, I think for some things it can go beyond that. Yeah, okay, that's just emergency backup thing. But I think I think even these days there's certain types of talks I still actually do a script, but I think crucially, when I'm writing that script, I'm writing it as if I'm saying it, and then when I give the talk, I try to pretend I'm not reading it. And the thing I do there is just to print it in such large font that the piece of paper is down here, so when you just sort of, you can maintain eye contact with the whole audience. The thing is written as I would talk anyway, and so you're essentially trying to fake what you can produce naturally. Where I think in certain types of talks, especially, I find the ones where they're too long to memorise, where, especially if you're talking about complex points, and if you're like me, you're on a lot and all that sort of thing, where you just want, the wording has to be just so, and if I knew if I was winging it, then it wouldn't come out quite so clearly. So that's when I sometimes find it is useful to have a script, but
no, absolutely. A couple things. So Wen's 3-minute thesis, for example, absolutely, no winging that, right? No matter how, that had to be so polished, and it took her ages to make it sound as though it wasn't rehearsed incredibly. I mean, so for things that really matter, absolutely. I mean, just hit the wording exactly right. But a couple things that help. I mean, if you do often have the presenter display that you can use. If not, you can use. But I would even just suggest a couple words that remind you of what you're going to say, right? But I'm still unclear. A lot of times, I mean, if you want to say something and you want to get the wording right, then put it up there. Right? I mean, there's no real reason that you can't just go, I want to say this, and I want to get it just right. And so here it is, right, for everyone to see it. And it's this weird sort of thing that we have in coming across as saying it perfectly, right, but not having any sort of aids with that. I mean, I'm not sure how that kind of happened, but I'd still suggest, I think, yeah, there's some formats where having a script is quite useful, but you do so kind of at the risk of sounding slightly artificial.
Mark, have you ever had a problem where you've gotten lost in your script, though, and then you can't find the spot where you left off?
No, I haven't, but
I think I've seen people
okay, when
do
I come
that.
close to it is when the font's been a little bit too small. I think it was, like 20-point font, double spaced, and so it's a thing down there, and and quite often with and sometimes it's I can do this. You follow the script until you got comfortable, and then suddenly you forget the script, and then off you go. So then which again is more the stage fright side of things. So I think I actually take your point is that you're absolutely right. It runs the risk of sounding staged, but then maybe that's down to
of course.
If your
it's a
acting
trade-off
ability,
between exactly.
if your acting ability is enough that you can pretend. So it's all like you can pretend. Oh, this is all coming off the top of my head, and I'm entirely lucid.
And if you're in the drunken session operating on one neuron, that's probably
that's right. Well, and then you're just hoping that everybody else is too, so you're pretty
that's right. Any other questions? All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.